When my daughter passed away, her law firm's senior partner called me and said, I found something in her office safe. Come alone and don't tell your son in law. Then his voice dropped lower. Frank, you could be in real danger. When I walked into that marble lobby and saw who was already waiting by the elevators, I froze. If you're new here, stick around, because this story goes places you won't see coming. Drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from tonight. Hit that like button before you go, and if you haven't subscribed yet, now's the time, because trust me, you'll want to see how this one ends. My name is Frank Delacroix. I'm 64 years old. I spent 31 years running a small hardware store on Chartres Street in New Orleans, the kind of place where regulars knew me by name, and I knew their kids by name too. My wife passed a long time ago, back when our daughter Renee was only 9, and I raised that girl mostly on my own after that, working the counter during the day and doing her homework with her at the kitchen table at night. Renee grew up sharp, sharper than me, sharper than anybody in our family. She became a lawyer, a good one, a partner at Beaumont and Cross by the time she was 38. This is her story as much as it's mine. Maybe more. The funeral was on a Thursday, the last week of June, at St. Louis Cemetery Chapel, the old one near the French Quarter that her mother's family had used for 3 generations. It was hot that morning, the kind of thick Louisiana heat that presses down on your chest before you've even gotten out of the car. I stood at the front of that chapel in the only good suit I owned, the one I'd worn to Renee's wedding 6 years earlier, looking at a casket that held the only child I'd ever had, and I kept waiting for it to feel real. It didn't, not yet. Renee had died 11 days earlier. The doctors called it a stroke. Sudden, unexpected, they said, especially for a woman only 41 years old, with no real history of anything like that in our family. I believed them because grief doesn't leave much room for questions. About 60 people came to the service. Old clients of hers, a few law school friends who'd flown in from Atlanta and Houston, my sister Denise down from Baton Rouge. Renee's husband Marcus sat in the front pew next to his sister Talia, and I remember noticing, even through my own fog of grief, that neither one of them looked like they'd slept in days. But neither one of them looked like they'd cried either. Talia kept glancing at her phone, tucked inside a folded program, and Marcus kept leaning toward her, murmuring something low and fast, the kind of whispering that looked less like comfort and more like two people trying to get their story straight. At exactly 11:15, right as the priest was closing the service, my phone buzzed hard against my leg. I almost let it go to voicemail. Then I saw the name on the screen. Walter Beaumont, Renee's boss, the man who'd made her partner. I slipped out into the side hallway of the chapel, my pulse already climbing. And when I answered, his voice was tight in a way I had never once heard from him in the 15 years I'd known him. Frank, he said, I need you to come to the office. Right now. Today. Walter, I'm at my daughter's funeral. A pause on the line, heavy enough that I could hear him breathing. I know. I am so sorry. But Frank, listen to me. Renee left something with me, a letter and a drive. She gave it to me 3 weeks ago and told me only to open it if something happened to her. My chest went tight. What did you find? Not on the phone, he said. Come straight here after the service. Don't stop at the house first. And Frank, whatever you do, don't mention this call to Marcus or Talia. Not yet. You could be in danger. To understand why those words landed the way they did, you'd need to understand who Walter Beaumont was. The man had built a law firm from a 2-room office into 40 attorneys over 30 years. He did not rattle. I'd sat across from him at Renee's partnership dinner, at her wedding, at a dozen firm holiday parties, and every single time he was the calmest man in the room, the kind of man who remembered your birthday and your coffee order both. Hearing that same voice crack down the phone line told me something in this world had gone badly wrong. I need to explain something about my family before I go any further, because none of what happens next makes sense without it. Renee married Marcus Whitfield 4 years after law school. He worked in finance, some kind of investment advisory role that never quite made the money he always talked about it making. They had a nice house in Metairie, a life that looked good from the outside. And over the last 2 years, Marcus's sister Talia had moved into the guest house behind their place after what Renee once described to me, carefully, over coffee, as some trouble with a landlord. Talia didn't work, not really. She called herself a wellness consultant, which as far as I could ever tell meant she sold vitamin supplements to people on the internet. Sunday dinners at Renee's place had slowly turned into Talia being there every time I visited, always hovering, always helpful. Always the one who just made Renee a smoothie or picked up her prescriptions from the pharmacy on Magazine Street. Since Renee's been working herself into the ground, and somebody's got to look after her. I hadn't thought much of it at the time. Renee hadn't either, or if she had, she never said so to me. Looking back now, that's exactly the problem. The month before she died, something had changed in my daughter, and I hadn't paid close enough attention because I was proud of her instead. Proud of how hard she was working, how many hours she was putting into some big case at the firm. She started getting these headaches, she told me, migraines that came and went. And she'd started forgetting small things, dates, names of people she'd known for years. Her doctor put her on a new medication for the headaches, something Talia had actually recommended, had actually driven her to pick up herself more than once. I remember one Saturday, I stopped by unannounced with a king cake from the bakery she loved, and I found Talia alone in Renee's kitchen, with her prescription bottles lined up on the counter, and Renee asleep on the couch at 2 in the afternoon, which wasn't like her at all. Talia smiled at me, said Renee had a rough night and just needed the rest, and left 20 minutes later. I didn't think anything of it. My daughter trusted her sister-in-law. I trusted my daughter's judgment. 4 days before she died, Renee called me, sounding strange, distracted. She asked if I remembered signing something with her back in the spring, paperwork about a trust, something to do with protecting the house in case anything ever happened to her and Marcus. I told her I didn't remember any such thing. She went quiet for a second, then said Marcus had mentioned bringing papers by for the two of us to look at together, and she figured she must have just forgotten the details. We let it go. We had no reason not to. The morning she died, a Wednesday, I was at the store restocking shelves when my phone rang. It was Marcus, saying Renee had collapsed at home, that the ambulance was already on its way. By the time I got to Turo Infirmary, they'd already lost her. Stroke, they told me. Sudden. Nobody asked a single question beyond that, and honestly, in my grief, neither did I. Standing in that chapel hallway with Walter's voice still shaking in my ear, all of it came rushing back at once. The prescription bottles on the counter. The trust papers I never signed. The way Marcus and Talia had been circling my daughter for months like they were waiting on something. "Walter, tell me what's happening," I said, keeping my voice low so it wouldn't carry back into the chapel. "I can't explain it on the phone, Frank. Just come. And don't stop for anything." My hands were shaking by the time I hung up. I walked back into the chapel, sat through the final blessing without hearing a single word. And when the doors opened and people started moving toward their cars, for the burial, I told Marcus I had some paperwork from Renee's insurance I needed to sort out, that I'd meet everyone back at the house that evening. Marcus barely looked up from his phone. "Sure thing, Frank. Whatever you need to do." Talia didn't even glance my way. She was already crossing the parking lot fast, heels sinking slightly into the wet gravel, talking low into her phone to someone I couldn't see. I stood there a moment, watching my son-in-law's sister hurry away from her sister-in-law's own funeral, like she had somewhere far more urgent to be, and that cold feeling in the hallway settled deeper into my chest. I got into my old Chevy pickup and drove across town toward Beaumont and Cross on Poydras Street, my daughter's casket still fresh in the ground behind me, with no idea that the worst part of that day hadn't even happened yet. The firm took up the top 2 floors of a glass tower downtown, the kind of building Renee used to point out to me with real pride every time we drove past it together. I parked in the garage at 12:20, still in my funeral suit, my tie already loosened, my mind racing through every version of what Walter could possibly need to show me. I walked through the lobby past a security guard who waved me through, recognizing me from firm events years back, and headed for the elevator bank. That's when I saw a car pull hard into the loading zone, right outside the glass doors behind me. Fast, careless, half up on the curb. It was Marcus's silver BMW. I stopped walking completely. My son-in-law was supposed to be at the burial site right now, greeting people, standing where a husband is supposed to stand on the day his wife goes into the ground. Instead, here he was, downtown at her law firm, less than 20 minutes after telling me he'd meet me back at the house. I stepped behind a marble pillar near the elevators, my heart hammering, and I watched through the glass as Marcus got out of his car and half-jogged toward the entrance, straightening his jacket, his face pale and tight in a way I had never once seen on him. He wasn't grieving. He looked like a man running out of time. He walked straight to the reception desk, not the elevators, and started talking fast and low to the young man working there. I couldn't hear the words, but I could read his body, leaning in, one hand flat on the counter, the the posture of a man trying to talk his way somewhere he wasn't welcome. The receptionist shook his head, picked up the phone. I used that moment to slip past them both toward the elevator, my dark suit blending into the lobby just enough, and I rode up to the 32nd floor with my pulse hammering in my ears. Walter was waiting for me the second the doors opened, his face pale, his tie loosened like he'd been pacing for an hour. "Frank, thank God," he said, and before I could get a word out, "Did you see him downstairs?" "That's my son-in-law," I said. "Walter, what is going on? Why is Marcus here?" Walter's jaw tightened. "Because I called the house phone by mistake this morning, before I reached your cell," and Talia answered. "I only told her I needed to speak with you about paperwork Renee left behind." I didn't say what. Apparently that was enough to send Marcus racing down here to get to it before you did. My stomach dropped straight through the floor. Get to what before I did? Walter led me down the hallway toward his corner office, and over his shoulder, without turning around, he said the words that changed everything. "Your daughter knew something was happening to her, Frank, and she made sure I'd be the one to tell you, not them." His office looked out over the bend of the Mississippi, a desk too big for one man, framed photos of his grandkids along the windowsill. He closed the door behind us and locked it, then reached into a drawer hidden behind a row of law books and pulled out a plain manila envelope with Renee's handwriting across the front. "For Dad only. If anything happens to me. She brought this to me 3 weeks ago," Walter said, sitting across from me instead of behind his desk, which told me something about how seriously he meant to treat this. "Said she didn't trust keeping it at the house. Said if anything happened to her, I was to give it to you. Only you, in person. And to warn you to be careful who you told." My hands shook opening it. Inside was a folded letter in Renee's handwriting, and a small flash drive taped to the back of the page. I read the letter right there in his office. Renee wrote that she'd noticed money missing from an investment account she and Marcus shared. Small amounts first, then larger ones, moved out over about 5 months. She wrote that she'd asked Marcus about a trust document she didn't remember signing, and he'd waved it off. But something in his face when she pushed had made her uneasy enough to start quietly checking the account activity herself. Late at night, after he'd gone to bed, she wrote that she'd found a trust filing with both our names on it, dated in the spring, except she was certain now she'd never signed it, and she didn't think I had either. She wrote that she'd started feeling foggy and forgetful around the same time Talia had started managing her migraine prescriptions, picking them up herself, portioning out her daily doses to help her stay organized. She wrote that she didn't want to believe what she was starting to suspect, but she wasn't willing to stay silent about it either. "There's more on the drive," Walter said quietly. "Financial records, messages. Frank, I think you should sit down for this part." He plugged the drive into his laptop and turned the screen toward me. The first folder held account statements Renee had screenshotted herself, highlighting 5 transfers totaling just over $74,000, moved out of the shared investment account between February and June, all authorized using a trust document neither of us had ever signed. The money had gone into an account under Talia's name. The second folder held photographs Renee had taken of her pharmacy bottles, dates and dosages written in her own careful handwriting, comparing what the label said against what she remembered actually being handed. She'd noted that the pill count never quite matched, that there always seemed to be extra capsules mixed in, a slightly different shade of white than her usual prescription. The third folder was the one that put ice straight through my chest. A screenshot of a text conversation Renee had found on a shared laptop she and Marcus used for household bills. A conversation between Talia and someone saved only as R from 3 weeks before Renee died. Talia had written, "She's starting to ask questions about the account. We need to move faster before she says something to her father." The reply from R read, "Just keep her on the higher dose, a little longer. A stroke at her age won't raise a single eyebrow." I sat completely still, staring at that screen, feeling something break loose in my chest I didn't have words for yet. Walter put a hand on my shoulder and told me my daughter had come to him specifically because she was afraid that if something happened to her, whoever was responsible would try to control the story before I ever learned the truth. And she'd wanted to make absolutely sure that didn't happen. "She protected you from beyond the grave, Frank," Walter said quietly. "Now we protect you for real." I asked him why he'd warned me to keep Marcus and Talia away from all this. He said it plainly. If Renee's suspicions were right, and everything in front of us said they very likely were, then Marcus and Talia were capable of far more than moving money around. And if they realized I had this drive, I could be next in line, especially with a trust document already on file that could hand them control over everything Renee had left behind, including me. We need proof strong enough for the police, Walter said, not just suspicion, and we need it before they know we're looking. That afternoon, Walter called an old friend, a retired NOPD detective named Curtis Rivard, who did private investigative work now. Curtis met us at the office within the hour. A broad, quiet man in his 60s with the kind of patience that made you feel like every word you said actually mattered. He went through the drive twice without saying much, then finally said what none of us wanted to hear out loud. "This is enough to open something," he said. "It's not enough yet to guarantee a conviction. We need the pharmacy records pulled the right way. We need a forensic look at that trust signature. And Frank, if you're willing, a camera in the house for a little while would give us everything else we need. Because people like this, they talk when they think nobody's listening." I sat there in that office, my daughter 11 days in the ground, being asked by two men I barely knew to walk back into my own life and act as though nothing had changed while my son-in-law and his sister believed they'd already won. It was the hardest thing anyone had ever asked of me. I said yes without hesitating, because Renee had trusted me with the truth, and I wasn't about to let it go to waste. Curtis installed two small cameras 2 nights later, one in a smoke detector above the kitchen table at Renee's house, where Marcus still lived and where I now stayed most nights, helping sort through her things. One inside an old clock on the mantel in the living room. Talia had moved fully into the main house by then. "Just until things settle," she'd told me, her voice syrup-sweet, her hand resting on my arm a beat too long. It took 13 days. 13 days of sitting across from my son-in-law and his sister at dinner, nodding along as they talked about handling Renee's affairs, watching Talia bring up the house itself twice, gently asking when I thought Marcus might be ready to think about selling, moving somewhere with fewer memories. Every night I went to bed feeling sick to my stomach, and every morning I got up and did it again, because Curtis had told me the moment they felt truly safe was the moment they'd stop being careful. On the 14th night it happened. Marcus and Talia were at the kitchen table after I'd gone up early, claiming I was tired, and the camera in the smoke detector caught them alone, voices low but clear as a bell. Talia said, word for word, "The trust account's fully moved. Once he agrees to sell the house, we're completely clear. We don't even need the paperwork anymore." Marcus answered, "Just don't get careless like you did with Renee. That pharmacist almost caught the refill pattern last month." Talia laughed, an actual laugh, and said, "Nobody double-checks a healthy 41-year-old's migraine meds. Marcus, nobody ever does." Curtis had that footage logged into an evidence file within the hour. Combined with pharmacy records, his contact pulled, showing an unexplained early refill pattern on a medication that, at high doses, sharply raises stroke risk, and a forensic handwriting analysis confirming the trust signatures were forged. We finally had what Curtis called an airtight case. Walter looked at me across his desk that night and said quietly, "Now we bring them into the open, Frank, on our terms, not theirs." We decided to do it at the reading of Renee's will, which her estate attorney, a sharp, careful woman named Delphine Arsenault, who'd handled the family's paperwork for a decade, had already scheduled for the following Tuesday at her office near Lafayette Square. Marcus and Talia had no idea Curtis Rivard would be sitting quietly in the small conference room next door, or that two detectives would be parked outside in an unmarked sedan waiting on his signal. I spent that final week acting exactly as I had for the past 13 days. Tired, quiet, cooperative, letting Talia believe her plan was landing exactly the way she wanted. She even hugged me the morning of the meeting and told me she was proud of how strong I'd been through all of this. I stood there and let her arms wrap around me, thinking of that text message glowing on Walter's laptop screen, feeling nothing but cold, steady patience. We all sat down in Delphine's office at 10 that morning. Marcus in a dark suit, Talia in a soft gray dress, both of them composed, almost relaxed, clearly expecting nothing more than a formality before they collected what they believed was already theirs. Delphine went through the standard opening, then, right on cue, looked over at me and asked if there was anything I wanted to add before continuing. "Actually, yes," I said, and I watched something flicker across Marcus's face, the first crack of real unease. "Before we go any further, I think it's time everyone in this room sees what my daughter left behind." I nodded toward the door, and Walter Beaumont walked in carrying his laptop, followed by Curtis Rivard, whose face Marcus clearly half recognized from somewhere. Maybe an old case. Maybe just instinct, because the color drained straight out of him. Talia's voice came out sharp. What is this? Frank, what's going on here? I looked at her steady and said, Renee, that's what's going on. Walter set the laptop on the table and played the kitchen footage without a word of introduction. Talia's own voice filled that small office clear as day, talking about the trust account being fully moved, about not needing the paperwork anymore. And then Marcus's voice answering back, warning her not to get careless like she had with Renee. The room went dead silent except for that recording, every single word landing like a hammer blow. Talia's face went white, then red, and she came halfway out of her chair. That's not what it sounds like. That's completely out of context. Sit down, Curtis said calmly, showing his credentials for the first time. There are 2 detectives outside this office right now, and everything you say from this point can and will be used against you. Financial exploitation of an elder, forgery, and a pending toxicology review from an exhumation request already filed with the coroner's office regarding Renee Whitfield's cause of death. Marcus hadn't said a single word yet. He just sat there, staring at the table, and I watched something break in my son-in-law's face. Not innocence, because that had been gone a long time already, but the specific look of a man who finally understood there was nowhere left to run. Frank, he said, voice cracking, I never wanted her to actually die, I swear to you. It was only supposed to slow her down, keep her confused enough that she wouldn't fight us on the paperwork. I felt Walter's hand land on my shoulder, steady, grounding, because for 1 second the whole room tilted, and all I could see was Renee in that hospital bed I never got to reach in time. But I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. My daughter used to call me every single Sunday of her life, just to talk, I said quietly. Every Sunday for 41 years. And you sat across from her counting down the days until you got the house. The detectives came in 2 minutes later. Talia cried the entire way out the door. Marcus never said another word. It's been almost 10 months now since that morning in Delphine Arsenault's office. Marcus pled guilty to financial exploitation of an elder and forgery and is currently serving a 6-year sentence at the Louisiana State Penitentiary. Talia's case went further. The exhumation and toxicology report confirmed dangerously elevated levels of a medication in Renee's system, far beyond anything any doctor had ever prescribed her, a substance known to sharply raise stroke risk at high doses. Talia was convicted of second-degree murder alongside the financial charges. She's looking at 30 years, maybe more once sentencing finishes. The man saved in that phone as R turned out to be a pharmacy technician. Talia had been seeing quietly for over a year, a man who'd been diverting medication out the back door of the pharmacy where he worked, and he's now facing his own set of charges, entirely separate from hers. I still live in my little house, off Chartres Street, above the hardware store I finally sold last spring to a young couple who promised me they'd keep the name the same. Some mornings it's quiet in a way that used to hurt, and now mostly it just feels honest. We recovered the money, every dollar of it, through the courts, though honestly, the money was never really the point. Walter Beaumont and I have become genuinely close since all of this. Something neither one of us ever expected out of a phone call at a funeral. He tells me now that Renee used to talk about me at the office more than I ever knew. Always proud, always certain her old man would do right by her if it ever came down to it. I set up a small scholarship in her name through the law school she graduated from, for students who need help paying for it, the kind of help nobody offered her when she was starting out on nothing but grit and a scholarship of her own. It isn't much yet, but it's growing, and every dollar in it carries her name forward doing something good, which is exactly the kind of thing she would have wanted. I think about that chapel hallway a lot, Walter's voice shaking on the other end of the line, telling me to come see something before it was too late to matter. My daughter protected me one last time from somewhere I couldn't even see her anymore, and I intend to spend whatever years I've got left making sure that protection meant something. If this story meant something to you, hit that like button, leave me a comment and tell me your thoughts, and subscribe if you want more real stories like this one. I'll see you in the next one.